This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus. Now, please don't get as confused as I was today when I read the subject of today's show. It says the advantages of being a bad resource. Now, most of us strive to be that good resource, Candace, and this is about being a bad resource.
Totally about it being a bad resource. So think about when people have either directly or indirectly voluntold you to take on certain tasks. So it's because they think that you'll take that off their plate.
Got it.
Okay. So what instances come to mind right now, if any?
Well, it is a constant thing in this household that if our son needs something or needs to talk about something, I'm the one who should take the phone call and be there, even though he may not like what I have to say or even not say. And I'm always volunteered by my husband. You go talk to him.
And so when that occurs, sometimes what? Not all the time, but what shows up for you?
It's a lot of frustration, anger, like, why me? Either I don't have the answers, or even if I think I do, I know that they aren't going to go across properly. And so I'm going to be the bad guy no matter what.
So you're kind of put in the corner in terms of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you leave that interaction or interactions, what's going on inside of you? What's the residue that continues to occur as a rule?
So it's getting better, but typically it's I would say a deep pain in my stomach, like, why me? Why do I have to take on all the extra stress? And oftentimes it's, why didn't I just keep my mouth shut?
And because
what I said wasn't appreciated, so it made the whole situation worse for me, because I basically am being told, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't understand, and so why say anything at all?
Yeah, so kind of being set up
Right.
in conversation for not necessarily a great outcome. So
Right.
it's a perfect example of, somebody else volunteering you, or even the other person who, basically has made up their mind, but they're calling in order to hear themselves talk and maybe work it out, the rest of it out in their mind. I mean, those are some of the ways that we can look at it. And, sometimes we can preface it. Well, I remember my sister said that she was talking to a friend and about something or other, and the friend stopped her after a few words, and she said, wait, first, are you asking for my input, or am I just supposed to listen? And I just thought that was a perfect thing, because then she knew, okay, I'm just nodding and whatever. If it was just to be a sounding board so the other person could hear themselves speak, there's nothing wrong with that. But it set up the expectations. And then when she would volunteer information to the speaker, she knew that it wasn't going to be rebuffed, because nothing is as frustrating as like, okay, wait a minute, you called me.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me, you don't know what you're talking about, or, whatever, or all the reasons why my response wasn't valid. So the idea, this phrase, be a bad resource, comes from Demir Bentley, who wrote Winning the Week. And he uses it basically to say that, we take on a lot of responsibilities, time-consuming things that, one, we're ill-prepared to do, two, we probably didn't volunteer for, didn't have space for emotionally and or, calendar-wise, and three, we're probably not equipped to really handle it. And it can show up, in our personal relationships. It can show up in always being on call. I always use the phrase candy on demand. I can't be candy on demand. I'm taking care of other people. And I had a client send an email to the person who had referred her to me because we didn't get back to her within 3 days. Well, some of those days were over the weekend.
Sure.
And I was taking care of another matter, an urgent matter, including Saturday. I spent 4 hours dealing with a client matter on Saturday. So the point is, I'm not candy on demand. We respond. I've been very responsive up to this point. I've given a lot of free guidance because it needed to be done, but it just kind of irked me because there was that expectation when I didn't have a say in the matter. So that was not being a good resource. In that instance, it wasn't intentional, but it could be going forward. So the point is to be aware of it. And then the other area where it can tend to show up is other people's errands and projects. So I don't know, like if you're going to the store, could you pick up, the dry cleaning for me, those kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a matter of when is it an expectation and when is it voluntary. So what are your thoughts so far?
Well, I remember when my mother was still very much alive and very vocal. My niece would come over to visit, and they would go to the grocery store. She would be taking my mother to the grocery store so my mother could get her groceries. And it was always like, well, can you just buy this for me? Buy that for me, and I'll pay you back at a later time. And my mother, of course, never could say no to her grandchildren. Okay. And my mother would call me and then complain, it was nice of her to take me shopping. In return, I typically take her for lunch, but today I spent over $100 on her groceries. And I would say to my mother, was that by choice or was that more by guilt or demand? And she said, well, how do you turn somebody down? And so I sort of learned with my mom that, my mother had set up that expectation that if my niece took her to the grocery store, that she was going to end up with free groceries.
It's a boundaries issue, not setting the expectation early.
Right. And my mother just never knew how to say anything to her. And so one day I picked up the phone, which I probably shouldn't have done. And I called my niece and I tried to explain very nicely that my mother doesn't know how to say no, but my mother was not made of money. And she stopped talking to me for quite a while. And so, again, I probably was the bad resource there because I sort of cut her off from my mother for a while. In fact, I went out and found somebody who would actually take my mother grocery shopping, and we would pay that person a flat fee. And my mother had more money in her pocket. But it's easy to get pulled in like that.
Definitely, especially when you rely on them personally and their family members. It can be very thorny, not in a tense way, but just awkward. And then how do you start saying no if you didn't say no from the get-go? And maybe it was perfectly fine in the beginning, but if it persists, we have to constantly be able to revisit that equation. Well, there's a third category, so I don't know if this is relevant to you at all, but when we delegate something to someone and they either delegate it back to us by asking for input, or they just like give it to us back, give it back to us. All right. And we call that delegating up or delegating it back. Like, oh, I'm not sure how you want this. Well, just, do something and then let me look at that. So does that show up in your world?
Absolutely. A year ago, I had a client who wanted to create a business card, but said they didn't know how. And so I said, well, I do that for a living. So is this something you'd like me to do for you? Now, I prefaced it that I do it for a living. Okay. So I didn't put a cost on it for this person, which was my first mistake. But I went ahead and she said, sure, I'd love for you to do that. So I went ahead and I created something and I sent it to her. Well, it wasn't quite what she wanted. Well, to make a long story short, this went over 4 months. And she never selected what she wanted. And I never got paid for it. And I realized that, she threw it in my lap and I accepted it, but I didn't put conditions on it. And I probably should have. Well, I know I should have.
Yeah, and I certainly have had the same thing in my day job with clients that I don't have tracked necessarily specifically. That's not, while I'm familiar with the area of law because I've practiced in it before, it's not an area where I'm currently practicing. So I don't have the team members that I can delegate to. So it means that it stays on my desk, which is always, a full desk. And then I don't have the time slots available for it. And then I kind of have to hide it from my team that I agreed to do this thing. So then, they're wondering what I'm doing in the other room when I'm supposed to be working on A and I'm actually working on B. And then inevitably it's not enough when the person keeps going and those refinements and so on. It's like, wait, this is supposed to be just a simple little favor I'm doing for you that requires, a lawyer. Yeah, we have a letter of engagement in place, but one example is we often do trusts for people, and some people think that every word in the document is up for editing. It's like, no, we know that these words work. So we have a template we follow because we know that these have been tested over time in the courts and it's in the black letter law and so on. But it's not a bespoke trust, like a bespoke jacket or dress or something. It's, it's an off the rack dress, but tailored to your specific needs, but not every need and every capricious decision you may want to make. So it's, the common denominator is that we're in a position where we have skills, we can make them available. I imagine you're the same as me, that I feel bad if I withhold, my resources. I'm a generous person, and sometimes to a fault, and I want to be helpful, but it's hard for me to withhold something for somebody without saying, you have to pay me, because it seems ungenerous. So what are your thoughts there?
I mean, I can't disagree. There are so many of us who we don't value our talent and time enough. And we want to be nice to everyone around us, that we think at first, oh, this is only going to take me, a short amount of time. So I can fit it in. And then when it doesn't, it's very hard to backpedal and go to that person and say, hey, by the way, I have spent X amount of hours on this. I need to be paid. And then they sort of like look at you like, well, didn't you volunteer?
Right. Or the expectation from the get-go is you do it for free. And, I certainly have done my share of pro bono work, or other favors and so on. So the common denominator here is, we can be a bad resource in those ways by not fulfilling their expectation, but we can back it up and actually start out strategically to be a bad resource, so that we don't go that far down the path. It's just noticing that fork in the road where we missed a turn that would have been beneficial for both sides of the equation.
So that's almost like saying, yes, I know how to create the business card, and this is what I charge for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is what you get for that fee.
Right.
All right, because it's you don't get 15,000 edits. There was an attorney that I used to call from time to time. He's now deceased, really wonderful man. And I would call him with questions early in my career. And one time I was calling with a question about a will, and he said, is this a Hummel will? And I said, what? I've never heard of a Hummel will, because sometimes we refer to something by a case name that stood for a particular legal concept. And he said, well, I had a next door neighbor, an elderly woman, widow, and she wanted to get her will done, and I offered to do it for her for free. And so she had an extensive Hummel collection of those figurines. And he said, so in the first meeting, she identified some of the top Hummel figurines and to whom she wanted each to go. But then over the course of several weeks, leading into a couple of months, she kept changing her mind, and he thought he had to keep revising it until he finally got it done. In that whole time, it wasn't getting signed. But, the point of it was, I always think of him saying that, is this a Hummel will? I don't think to say that to myself often, soon enough. But in time, I realized, oh, this is a Hummel will, or this is a Hummel case, and so on. So I just think it's kind of I know at least if he could do it, because he was in the sunset of his career at that point. If he was doing it, I'm not alone in my tendencies in that regard. And I think any of us in the helping profession are.
It's funny. My mother, amongst family and friends, was known as the baker. You could ask her to bake a pie, and it was done with perfection in a very short amount of time. And friends would call her up because they were having company over for the weekend. And they would say to my mother, your apple pie is just the best. Could you bake us an apple pie? And my parents weren't invited to their home. Okay. And my mother would say, well, sure. And then on top of the apple pie, your chocolate chip cookies are just the best, God, if a couple batches of those, and she'd stand in the kitchen and she'd bake, and then she'd go deliver it. And she did it out of the kindness of her heart. But I remember my father sitting her down one day and saying, if you're going to do this, then you have to start charging for it. And she kept saying, I can't do that. These are my friends. And he said, are they really your friends? Or do they just want your baked goods?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a perfect example of, a true friend would be sensitive to some clarity about what the expectations are, and at least paying for the ingredients and whatever.
Exactly. And, those are little things that I remember, but, you get caught up in your own life, and your friends come and ask you things, and you want to do things for your friends. But sometimes we think our clients are our friends too, and they may be to a degree, but that doesn't mean you have to give everything away.
Well, that sister that owned a restaurant, and she would see repeat customers come in, and she was friendly with them and so on, but then they would want to engage in really deep conversations, and she was running the restaurant and supervising and so on, and she had a phrase, something to the effect of, don't misinterpret my interest with, we're friends, I'm friendly, but we're not friends, and therefore I'm at work, I'm not here as a friend. So I can't engage in deep conversations when you're pouring your heart out on my shoulder and so on, because I have to supervise the wait staff. Those kinds of things
makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah. So with the listeners, what do you think some action they could take, or some takeaway that they could take from the conversation today?
Well, again, it's not that we want to give bad advice, but maybe the thing is to think about how much advice and support you want to give away. Because it takes away from, our own time and our own needs. So it's okay to say no when you're put up to that, when you're at a committee meeting and they say, hey, Candace, you are the best one to represent us at the next meeting. And you just take it upon yourself. And it's like, why did I do that? It's not something I really wanted to do. So we have to learn to be able to say no, that, hey, I appreciate your confidence, but I think we better select somebody else.
Yeah. And, we have a limited time budget. So a yes to that item would be a no to something else. And sometimes just our personal time,
Right.
if we don't get a lot of it. So, and I think the other part is the bad resource part isn't the quality of the work or the output. It's the barriers we put into place, the filters we put into place before it can land on our plate, either by others or by our own inability to say no, especially to, some people that are particularly good at getting us to say yes.
And I think it's important that we don't judge each other for what it looks like we're not doing. Because I see a lot of that. It's like, well, I asked Mary to do something, and look at, she's just sitting outside on her deck, drinking iced tea. Well, you know what? That's important. She probably needed that downtime. She didn't have to do what you asked of her. But I hear it all the time. Oh, Karen, you said that you weren't working today. So is there a reason why you couldn't do this? Yeah, the reason is because I chose not to do it.
Well, and just because you asked me to do it and I may have said yes, doesn't mean you get to go to the front of the line.
Right.
All right. And that was what that communication was with that one person that I mentioned in the beginning, that, I had other things that were, deathbed planning, those kinds of things. And, I set those expectations that I'm a moving target many days. So it's dictated by, the urgent needs, the life or death needs, and then we do the other stuff. And we've got it reasonably figured out. And plus the email came in after 9 p.m. So, that doesn't really count as a day.
Right. I totally understand. That's why, thanks to this podcast, I have learned to create those boundaries. And it's not that I don't sometimes expand them occasionally, but just knowing that, hey, these are the boundaries I have to set for certain things, just makes it much easier to do things the correct way for me.
The right balance, the right combination of things, and so on. That's
Exactly.
wonderful that you have choice, the fork in the road.
Well, for those of you listening today, it is the official Labor Day, and for some people that means it's the end of the summer. But I just heard, Candace, that we are getting summer back for at least a week. It's going to be in the 90s this
I
week.
heard that too. Yes. Well, I used to be a lifeguard, and often I was on the quarter system in my first 2 years of college. So I would be lifeguarding past Labor Day as a rule. But now kids are going back to school so much earlier that would never have worked. So
Right.
I think the idea of summer is amorphous.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to try to enjoy the last hot days of the summer. And so if anybody wants me to do anything, if it's not on my schedule, I'm not doing it.
You're going to be a bad resource. All right.
Absolutely. Well, have a great day, and thank you. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Karen. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.